Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Uh, Thank you all for joining the call today. And today we'll talk about Azure AD, and this is in continuation. With my previous sessions, I had conducted, I think, couple of more sessions in the past, and today we are going to talk about Azure AD and Identity Access Management. So in this series, the topic that we will cover today is Azure AD connector and the pass-through authentication. Essentially, what happens is like, when you're using identity and access management or authentication in Azure, right? There are three ways that you can configure your identity or your users authentication per se. One is cloud-only identity, right? So where you have all the users only in Azure AD, you don't have any on-prem connectivity, and you're a small organization, you want to maintain your identity in cloud. In that case, you will set up your very primitive connectivity model where you will have all your users in Azure AD. Uh, the next one is same sign-on. Same sign-on is where you will sync your user identity along with the password to Azure AD. So what that would do is that will allow you to leverage the same not the same username, but identical username and same password. So user will get the impression that they are using the same identity, but it's not a single sign-on. That means the authentication is still happening in Azure AD. It's not coming back to on-prem where you have your identities. So in last session we did saw the demo where we set up the same sign-on using Azure AD Connect. So Azure AD Connect is the tool, the synchronization tool from Microsoft, which helps you synchronize your identity from on-prem into Azure AD. The third one is single sign-on, and that's where our focus would be today. So there are various ways you can set up your single sign-on. Uh, One that we are going to cover today is Azure AD Connect Pass-Through. That's a new feature, which was introduced by Microsoft. Otherwise, earlier, if you had to set up your single sign-on, you would use ADFS or any kind of third-party federation technologies. Uh, but there was need of the hour where there are a lot of customers who didn't want to set up a DMZ-based ADFS infrastructure or federation infrastructure and still want to utilize single sign-on, and that's where AD Connect pass-through or Azure AD pass-through authentication comes into the picture. Uh, one thing to keep in mind that it is still in public preview, which means it is available for you for consumption, but you can expect some feature changes once it goes GA. So it is still not generally available, but anybody and everybody can do a POC or some do a pilot testing. So today we will cover the Azure AD Connect pass-through. So I will go through the scenario and then we will jump into the demo section wherein we will do the demo on the Azure portal, and from there we will see how to configure Azure AD pass-through. ADFS we'll cover in next session, wherein we'll set up the ADFS infrastructure and set up the single sign-on. So moving on to Azure AD Connect pass-through. Sorry, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. That would help us to maintain the quality. Thank you. All right, so what is Azure AD pass-through authentication? Right? That's the first question that comes in our mind. So this Azure AD Pass-Through Authentication is a solution which Microsoft has designed keeping in mind these organizations' requirement. So some of the organization has this requirement where they didn't want to sync their password. So you saw that same sign-on required you to sync the password from on-prem into Azure AD, and a lot of organization they are they don't want to do that. Obviously then they said that you have ADFS or federation, but at the same time they didn't have the budget, or they didn't had or they really didn't want to set up a complex environment to use ADFS. So what happens is in that case, what Microsoft has done is they have come up with the Azure AD Pass-Through Authentication, which lets organization set up single sign-on and leverage the same kind of capability what ADFS offers without having to set up federation infrastructure. So what happens in case of pass-through authentication, since it is a single sign-on, that means your password or your user login is not authenticated by Active Directory, rather than it is authenticated by or your on-prem Active Directory. So essentially, what will happen is, when a user try to log in, their authentication is not going to happen in Azure AD, but rather than the user authentication will come back to on-prem via help of uh, Azure AD Pass-Through connector, which get installed on your machine when you install your Azure AD connector software. And that connector will authenticate the user to on-prem domain controller. So that means you have true single sign-on, and you don't need to sync your user's password. You still sync user identities, but you don't sync the user passwords or hashes of that password. So what are the benefits of the pass-through authentication? Some of the benefits, it's like it's easy to use. As I said, you don't need a complex on-prem deployment infrastructure, which means you don't need a DMZ, demilitarized zone. You need to put in your ADFS proxy server or ADFS web server on-prem. You don't need to set up that infrastructure. You don't need to invest money onto that infrastructure. Plus, you don't have to maintain that complex configuration of your firewall to allow entities from internet to come back and hit your public endpoint of ADFS or SiteMinder. uh, it is also secure. The secure in the reason is like your on-premise passwords are never stored in cloud, so you're not syncing. Obviously, even if you enable the password sync is not it goes in plain text, but it's a hash of hash. But still, you're not storing it in cloud in any ways, whether in hash or plain text. Obviously, plain text is out of window. But the hash itself, you are also not syncing the hash, right? The second thing that I talked about, that you don't need any DMZ infrastructure. You don't need to put any server which is in DMZ, because remember, when you set up ADFS or federation, that endpoint should be accessible from internet, which means the Azure AD will come and do a handshake. So it's like an inbound connection to your corpnet, which is a big no-no to any organization, or any security consultant would say that that you can't allow any internet entity or entity sitting on internet to come back and talk to your server which is on-prem. If you need such kind of communication, in that case the server has to put in DMZ, which is demilitarized zone, fully secured by firewall, and that DMZ is separated from our internal network. But in this case, the Azure AD pass-through connector, uh, it doesn't, there is no inbound connection, rather than it makes an outbound connection, which means now the server which is sitting on-prem is going out to internet, which is very much allowed in any organization. So you have outbound internet connection, which is like, acceptable, as opposed to an entity sitting on internet like Azure AD or any server in on to internet, they coming back to your on-prem infrastructure. That's never, that's in security parlance, it's a big risk. And if you needed that kind of connectivity, you will put your server in DMZ. Uh, but with pass-through connector, you don't need that, basically, because it makes outbound connection. In the next slide, we will see, how the authentication works. So essentially, we will see the complete authentication flow, how it works, as opposed to our ADFS authentication, which involves an inbound connection to our federation public endpoint. It can also be integrated with your multi-factor authentication. So if you have set up any MFA for your any of your Active Directory account or any your user account, and if you have set up MFA, cloud MFA, it can be integrated with pass-through as well. It is also In terms of reliability, you can have multiple pass-through connector installed. So basically, for high availability, you can have more than one connector sitting on-prem, so which can take the workload. If one connector goes down, the second will take care. It can be in active fashion the way you want to configure. So that way you're sure about that your authentication never fails because you have high availability and reliability. So before I move on, is there any question from audience regarding Azure AD Pass-Through Authentication, or in any form of or a question about single sign-on or same sign-on? Okay, all right, no question. So then I will move on to the uh, next slide.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You
please.
there?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Is the Azure AD Connect pass through? Is that the second? Is that the third form of DearSync? Because I saw that there was DearSync, and then that got replaced by Azure AD Connect. But now you're talking about Azure AD Pass Through. Is it in sequence or are they separate paths?
So DearSync got replaced with Azure AD Connect. That's a very good question. So what Microsoft has done is they have augmented Azure AD Connect. So they have not replaced Azure AD Connect, but rather than they have augmented the feature of Azure AD Connect and included this pass-through configuration option under Azure AD Connect. So it's an augmentation of existing Azure AD Connect version.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's very good question. So when you install Azure AD Connect, we will see in the demo that we have that option of setting pass through. So there are but to remember the fact that though it can be installed, the pass through connector can be installed on Azure AD Connect, but you can also install it separate. So you don't need Azure AD Connect. However, what Microsoft has done is they have bundled Azure AD Connect as well as the pass-through connector together in Azure AD Connect software. And it was a good question. So thanks for asking that question. Anybody else has any other question? Okay. So then I'll move on to the next slide. So this is the slide, the picture, this is available on Microsoft website, and I have just borrowed this picture from Microsoft. It was a very, intuitive walkthrough, so I thought of, stealing it from the Microsoft website. But on the left side, what you see is, maybe let me turn on my pointer. Okay. So what you see over here on the left side, so this is your on-prem where we have, our domain controller. So you have domain controller sitting uh, here. So like, so your end user identity is basically sitting at the domain controller level here. And you have the second component which you see over here, which is your Azure AD Connect server along with your pass-through connector installed on it. So when you install Azure AD Connect, it gives you that option to install the pass-through connector. Then you have your, Azure AD, which is sitting in cloud, or all your application which is sitting in cloud. So it could be Office 365 or any application which is making use of Azure AD identity. And finally, you have your end user. So what happens, when you have set up your Azure AD pass-through, so what's going to happen in terms of authentication? So the first sequence, what will happen is your user is going to, so let's say, a user is trying to log into a portal. Now it could be your Azure portal or it could be Office 365, any application he or she is trying to access. So they will, get redirected to Azure Active Directory logon website. So where, they will be asked to specify their username and password. Now, when they put in their username and password, Azure Active Directory recognizes that I have been set up for uh, pass-through authentication, which means I don't have the user's username and password, or rather I recognize the user, but I don't have the password. So I have to authenticate this user using the pass-through authentication. So subsequently, once the user has put in his or her username and password, Azure AD puts that username and password in a queue. It's called like authentication queue, you can say. So basically, over here, there is an authentication queue which exists, wherein Azure AD is going to put the username and password in encrypted format. So it's not a plain text format. Azure AD is going to make use of public key and private key to put that, encrypt that username and password, and then put it in authentication queue. Now, after that, Azure AD job is not yet done, but Azure AD is at least has offloaded its authentication task to the authentication queue, which is sitting in cloud. Now, that's where the your Azure AD pass-through connector, which is sitting or which is installed on the Azure AD Connect server over here, it will take over. So what it's going to do is it on a set frequency, it pulls this authentication queue. So, I don't know what's the set frequency, but let's say assume every 30 second or every 10 second, it pulls this authentication queue. And once it pulls it, it says, hey, I have an authentication request which is pending in this authentication queue. So it will go ahead and retrieve this. Now, when it retrieves it, it has, as I said, it's encrypted, so it brings it back and it uses its public key and private key pair, which gets set up when you installed pass-through connector on Azure AD Connect. It uses that and decrypt that credential. We basically username and password. Once the credential is decrypted, it's going to go and talk to the domain controller to authenticate that user. So basically, it'll say, hey, I have this user, this is the username, and this is the password. Can you validate it for me? Can you see if this user is valid or not? So then it comes to the domain controller, which is sitting on-prem, and then says, okay, let me verify this user. Now that user can be, user can be a valid user, or username password could be valid or invalid, depending on whatever it is. It returns the response over to the Azure AD Connect server, which has the pass-through connector installed on it. Once it receives the response, whatever the response is, whether the success or failure, is gonna go ahead and relay the same, the result, and post that result in this authentication queue to Azure Active Directory. Now, so Azure Active Directory can, will receive the response from the pass-through connector server and say that, okay, if the user is authorized, or has put in the right username and password, and it's a valid credential, then what will happen is Azure AD will issue a token to the end user. Now, obviously all these things is happening in the background, so the token will issue to the user's browser session, right? So if they are using Chrome or Internet Explorer, or they're on mobile device or any devices that they are, the token will be issued to that user. Now that user can present that token to any of the application that they're trying to access. It could be O365, it could be your custom app, or it could be any third-party application which is integrated with Azure AD. So essentially, what we saw here is Azure AD didn't make any inbound call to your on-premise infrastructure. It's always your pass-through connector sitting on-prem was making the connection uh, or outbound call. So which means it's perfectly it's like it's much better in terms of allowing the connectivity back to internet, rather than allowing Azure AD or any entity on internet coming back to on-prem. Because in that case, if you really had to do that, you'll have to put in a DMZ infrastructure in DMZ. So that's the difference, between the ADFS or the federation infrastructure and between the pass-through. Okay, so I will pause and take any questions. Anybody has any question in terms of how the authentication flow is? No question? Okay, so then probably we will move into the demo section where we are going to.
Sorry, I got one more question.
Sure,
Sorry for
please.
that. So I guess my question, listening to all of this, is why would anybody then settle for ADFS if it's been so difficult in the past to configure?
Hmm.
My network team is not really a big fan of it.
Hmm.
Why wouldn't they just move everything to Azure AD Connect with this pass-through configuration? Why use ADFS at all if it compromises and not compromises, but it is so much extra work where it's not as valid as just someone just doing a pass-through? Wouldn't the pass-through just be easier?
Yes, that's one of the selling point, what Microsoft has brought in, because there were a lot of customers who had issues with ADFS infrastructure, because there were a lot of customers who didn't have the federation infrastructure set up. So essentially,
Right.
what
What I'm saying is, wouldn't this just kill their? It seems to me that Microsoft's getting rid of the ADFS product because of these multiple complaints. Is that a fair assumption?
maybe you can assume that, but there will be need for ADFS. For example, if you had any third party, and you needed federation with third party. So in that case, probably you will require your federation endpoint if you're federating with any other, identity provider or any other identity store. But for Azure, yeah, what I can see is like, it's more of Azure AD Pass-Through is more of like, complementary, and it's an organization where they don't allow or they don't have a federation infrastructure at this moment, because it's new, it's still in preview, people are testing it. So uh, I don't see a lot of enterprise customer moving off of ADFS until this feature is fully gone GA and live and tested. But yes, it can be a competitor to ADFS for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. All right, so some of the resources that we're gonna make use of today in today's demo is the this is the link is where you have Azure AD Pass-Through Authentication configuration. This is an article from Microsoft website, which we will follow, and then you will also need Azure AD Connect. So this is the download link from where we'll download. Also, I will also briefly talk about, Microsoft has released some new enhancement to Azure AD Pass-Through. So I've just posted that link. So maybe it will be a good idea to talk about that. So Microsoft has recently, maybe, I think as 3 weeks back, they have introduced some new enhancement to Azure AD Pass-Through Authentication. So some of the enhancement is, as I said earlier, like, obviously the communication between Azure AD and on-premise connectors was HTTPS. It was fully secured for transferring username and password. But earlier, probably with this new feature, they have also started encrypting with the private key and public key. So that encryption takes place before it is put it in the queue, the authentication queue. They have also introduced some additional in terms of the attributes that you can use, that you can configure for username. So they have increased the supportability for that. Probably, for enterprise, it's looking more towards enterprise customers and for their ease of use, or for the flexibility of use. Finally, they have restricted, the authentication to only two ports. So now, even if you had to open outbound port, it's only the SSL port or the HTTP port. Only these two ports are, you can restrict your traffic to only these two ports. So you don't need to open any other RPC ports, or any SMTP, or any kind of TCP ports. It's only the AT and 443, the normal HTTP and HTTPS port. Uh, yeah, so I think these are the three enhancements that Microsoft has. And also, I didn't talk about the seamless single sign-on. So today, if your machine is joined to your domain and you try to access Azure AD Pass-Through through a browser, it will single sign you on, through your browser. You don't need to put in a username and you don't need to re-enter your password. And it works with Chrome browser, Internet Explorer. So there is a set of metrics which talks about in the supported browser. But that's something it's supported, which will give user very seamless sign-on experience, and they don't need to re-enter their password. It uses the Kerberos authentication, talks to on-prem domain controller and authenticate, and then passes on that information back to Azure AD. Okay, so what are we gonna do now is, anybody has any question before I jump into the demo? Okay, so in today's lab setup, what I have done is we have two VMs that I have set up. So maybe I can show you in my dashboard. What I have done is, uh, if it loads. So if I come in my virtual machines, so the infrastructure that I have is, I kept it very simple. So I have one domain controller and I have a member server which we will use to install the Azure AD Connect on that. And we will only make of these two servers today. These are for the future sessions. So I have this WoW Azure DC1, which is a domain controller running on Windows 2016. And then we have our WoW Azure ADFS, which where we will install the Azure AD Connect tool on that, and then we'll configure the pass-through authentication through that, and we will see that the agent gets installed on that. In terms of my Azure Active Directory, so in maybe if you have watched my last session, so we had set up a custom domain name for our Azure Active Directory. So every Azure AD has a name provided by Microsoft, which is called initial domain name. And then you can register your own custom domain name. If you bought a custom domain name from your domain registrar, you can come back and associate your domain name into your Azure AD. So what I have done in that my initial domain name, that was when you create an Azure AD, anybody who creates it today will get Azure AD name, which will have on Microsoft.com, appended to it. And then you specify whatever your first name. So it's a three-level domain name. That's initial domain. Then on top of that, if you have bought your own domain, like in my case, I have my own domain which I associated with the Azure, and you can associate multiple domains. It's not just you can have only one custom domain. If you have bought multiple domains, you can associate that. So what that does is, when your user log into Azure AD, you can utilize any of the custom domain name. So this initial domain name you can use without any problem. However, if you have associated your custom domain, so your user can also have your username at the rate, like in my case, user at the cloudeasy.com. So they can also use that domain name which I have registered, right? And if you come here in Azure AD Connect, this is the setting that you see over here. If you look at it, I have in past session we did it, but we disabled, so there is no sync status because it's not yet enabled. It's never run. So what are we gonna do is we will go ahead and set up the Azure AD Connect server. We will download it and then install it on the member server. Okay. So I'm back to my member server, which is in WoW Azure ADFS, and this is where I have this is the link that probably you will use to download your Active Directory Azure Active Directory Connect tool. So I've already had this open on my server. So I say go ahead and click on download. So it should download the tool, and then we'll go through the installation. Let's see. Can I have it download? So here is Azure AD Connect.msi. So I'm gonna save this, and then probably we can run it. So it's saved. Now I'll go ahead and run it. So basically what it will do is it will install the Azure AD Connect software onto my member server. So one of the pre-requirement that when you're installing Azure AD Connect, make sure that you're installing it on a member server, a server which is already joined to the domain. You can't install it in a workgroup. It's not going to work. So in this case, this server is joined to the Azure AD, our Active Directory domain. So what it will do is, when we install it on the domain joined machine, then, it can easily communicate with the domain controller because it has to talk to the domain controller and authenticate the end users, right? So let's see. So this is where, once you install it, then this is the welcome screen. Then that's you're gonna see for your Azure AD Connect, and you say, I agree to license. Obviously, you will have to agree, otherwise you cannot really install it. Now, here you have two options to select. One is express setting, one is customized. So if you are using, normal Azure AD, or, the password synchronization or same sign-on, in that case, probably you will use the express setting. But since we are using, we are going to make use of Azure AD Pass-Through, so you will have to say customize. You select customize. And here you can specify, and if you need to install the synchronization service, you want to connect synchronization. So in this case, you can specify whether you want to use an existing service account. If you're doing it, if you already have that, you can select that. If you have an existing SQL server, but you're not installing a SQL server on the Azure AD Connect server itself, in that case, you can specify that. Or you can specify, your custom sync groups, of which, probably if you want to do that. But I don't have any of these in this session, so I will just go ahead and say install. So it's going to take time, but then it should install the required component to enable Azure AD synchronization between my on-prem domain controller, rather than in this case, this domain controller is running in Azure, and then to Azure AD. So now it's installing a Microsoft SQL Server Express local database. So it's a SQL Express version for its database repository. It's going to take maybe a couple of minutes, and then we can go through the pass-through authentication post this installation. So it's progressing. And as a part of Azure AD Connect, it also installed its synchronization service, which is part of, if people know about it, FIM for Front Identity Manager, the earlier version. Now it's called MIM, Microsoft Identity Manager. So it's basically a mini version of MIM, which gets installed, which helps you to synchronize your identity from on-prem to Azure AD. And MIM is a product from Microsoft, which is MIM 2016, which allows you to synchronize object across two different forests, between two on-prem Active Directory, as well as between Active Directory and your on-prem Active Directory, Azure AD, and on-prem Active Directory both. So basically, it's a mini version of FIM, or MIM, you can say, which is getting installed currently in terms of synchronization service. and that's what is responsible for syncing the user identities. And this is a key service. So once this gets installed, you will be able to see the synchronization service, and you can configure and customize the synchronization service to uh, you know for example, if you want some users to be left out from synchronization, you can configure those advanced settings. If you want to sync only certain OUs, or advanced level of configuration you want to do, you can do that through synchronization service which gets installed. And when you open this, the console almost looks like uh, your MIM console or FIM console. So here we are. So we now, once the synchronization service is installed, you have two options. In last session, we saw that we did password synchronization, so which is same sign-on. Now today we are going to do pass-through authentication. So in this case, uh, basically we want the authentication to come back to on-prem, and this will also install the pass-through connector on the server to handle the authentication, right? I say next. So the next, you have to put in your username or the Azure AD credential. And here, one key thing to keep in mind is you have to put in an Azure AD user credential, which has global admin right. So Azure AD has different user roles, and global admin is the most powerful role. So you'll have to specify that user and the password, and that has to be in the initial domain name format. So in my case, it's going to be ascom at the rate cloud easy dot on microsoft.com, and then password is so you specify your Azure AD credential. Once you've specified that, it will validate. So if I click on next, it will say connecting to Microsoft Online to verify the credentials. Once it has verified the credentials, uh, it will pull the information about my domain, my local domain, and that's what it is doing, examining the domains. And then it is going to it's going to ask me my credential for my local Active Directory. So here you can see that it has found out that the Active Directory that I have as my domain name is wowazure.local. It has already it has read permission. Any machine that is joined to the domain obviously has read permission, so it discovered that. Now once I click on add directory, it's going to ask me for my credential. Now this credential should have sufficient permission. So if you look at it, it clearly says that you should have enterprise admin credentials. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is I will type in the password, which is for my enterprise admin, and this is the local domain controller, or our local Active Directory forest credential. So this is not for Azure AD, and this credential has to be enterprise admin. So you can see that in my configure directory, it has taken my username and password, and it says wowazure.local is configured. So I will say this, and I say next. So it's going to go and talk to my domain controller. It will retrieve the information, and it will also specify. So you can see that you have your this is the sign-in configuration. How do you want your user to be added? So you can see that I have cloudeasy.com, which can be used by user. I have added this UPN suffix. So basically is a user principal name suffix, which you can add into your domain controller, into your forest, wherein user can use this to log in into your Active Directory. Now the way you add is, if I come back to my domain controller, uh, oops, Okay. All right. So the way you assign your custom UPN is you will open your Active Directory domain trust. This is a tool to manage your on-prem Active Directory domain, and you will come over here and you go to the properties of your Active Directory domain and trust. And this is where you can specify your alternate UPN suffix. In my case, I have already added cloudeasy.com, which is my Azure AD custom domain name. So now when I create a user, my user can also log in with their wow Azure.local identity, but at the same time, if they want to log into this domain, they can use their username at the cloudeasy.com. It will give them same unique name, even on-prem as well as in Azure AD. So that's how you can add it. So I'll show you if I come back into my Active Directory users and computers. So I have this user, right? And if I come over to accounts, here you can see that I can decide what user logon name I give it to my user. So I can say that wowISU.local is my local domain name. That is my forest name. But I can, since I have added cloudeasy.com as a UPN suffix, which is user principal name suffix, I can give this credential and say that now you can, if you need to log in, you can always log in with my NetBIOS name of your forest slash your username, but you can also use this your username at the cloudeasy.com and you get authenticated the same way. So you can decide that, and that's what Azure AD Connect installation has picked up. So I will just cancel it. And go back to my Azure AD Connect server. So I'm here. So you can see that's what try. So you saw that via Azure.local was one UPN suffix and then another one's Cloud EC. So wow Azure.local is by default. That's the forest name that I have created, and cloudeasy.com is it is verified. It says it's verified in Azure AD. So in the left side, what you see is the UPN suffix of your local domain controller or local domain or local forest. On the right side, what you see is your the Azure AD domain. So you see obviously wow Azure.local I don't have, and that cannot it's not internet routable, so it cannot be verified. It cannot be associated with my Azure AD. But cloudeasy.com, which I've given as UPN suffix on-prem, is verified and is a valid name which is verified in Azure AD as a part of custom domain name. This is where you can specify how user is going to be the attribute that you will use for Azure AD username. So when they log into Azure AD, so this is user principal name, the UPN that I was talking about. But if in case you're not happy and if you want to use any other attribute like email address, anything else, you can decide here. So I will leave it to Azure principal name, user principal name. So then say next. Now, this is the section where you will specify your domain OU and filtering, right? Do you want to sync all or you want to sync only the selected domains? In my case, I'll say that I don't want to sync. It's not a good practice to sync everything to Azure. You just want to sync only the groups or OU that has your users and the groups. So in my case, I have all the users in Cloud App OU. So I'm going to uncheck everything else. I say, uh, I say next. So basically what I did is, if I go back to previous, so what I did is I unchecked everything else and I just selected Cloud App. That's the OU where I have my users and groups, which I really want them to sync to my Azure AD tenant. I said next, and now here you will specify, how users will be identified in on-premise. So you want to specify, user identity exists across multiple directories. In that case, you can specify if you have more than one directory, like and they have the same, you can specify your own unique identifier. It's basically if you had a case wherein you can have same user exist in multiple places, then in that case, probably you will select this advanced option. But most of the time we use object quit, object set, which is if you're sure about that you don't have duplicate users. Most of the organization they don't have, so you will say users are represented only once across all directories. So we'll say that, and in my case, I have only one directory. If I had multiple directories, then probably it could have been a different case. So anyway, I'll leave that. Then this is the option which specify how would you identify your user. So it's called source anchor. You can have your own attributes. So if in a larger organization, you can specify what would be your source anchor, which will basically be the linking between the on-prem and Azure AD. So object seed is by default, object GUI that you have is by default is a big unique number which people use it. But if you have created your own unique attribute, you can specify that. But in this case, I'll select Azure manage the source anchor for me. So to keep it simple. Then I say next. Now here you can specify whether you want to only add certain groups. So or you just want to just synchronize all users and devices. In my case, I have selected OU and I'm saying that whatever users and group that I have in that OU, please sync it. But if you needed to exclude certain groups, in that case, you can specify the DN over here and that that you can exclude it. But in my case, I will just leave as it is and then proceed further. So this is where you really want the password synchronization. In my case, I don't need the password synchronization because it's going to be pass-through authentication that I have set up. If you didn't have the pass-through authentication, in that case, probably you will require the password synchronization. Rest other, if you really want to set extra permissions or extra attributes, you can specify those. But right now we'll just go with my Azure AD Pass-Through configuration, so which I don't want to synchronize my password. I say next. So this is where you can specify whether you want to go in production and then or you can enable the staging mode. But Microsoft gives you that option of Azure AD Connect, but I'm not going to specify that I want to go in staging mode. In this case, and if you set in staging mode, it will do everything, but it will not export any data to Azure AD. But I'm just gonna leave as it is. And prior to I click on install, I want to show you in Azure AD Connect, you can see the sync status is not enabled, right? You can see over here that I don't have, oops, sorry. So if I come over to this is my user, I want to close it, Azure Active Directory. Oh, maybe I can come back to my, yeah. So you can see that, you don't have sync status is set to not enabled. Once we configure this setting on the member server, you will see that will get turned on. So I say install, and this is going to initiate the synchronization process. It will go through the pass-through. You can look at it. It's saying, connecting pass-through authentication. And you can, by the way, you can also install pass-through authentication separately from Azure AD Connect. And the same, you can have it on multiple servers for high availability. It doesn't have to be on the same Azure AD Connect server. Just for simplicity purpose, Microsoft has given you that option, and they combined it in AD Connect, uh, the package. This is going to take some time, so I will set back and let it run. Once it is run, then what you will see is so maybe now let's come back here. So if you look at my users, you will see at this point of time I don't have any users from on-prem. So once it loads, I say all users. So you can see right now all these users that I have is this exists in cloud. This is not sourced from on-prem. But you will see that now I have a sync account, which is the Active Directory Azure AD synchronization account, which is used for syncing the object back and forth, has been created over here. And in couple of minutes, you will see once that is finalized, you will see users start getting populated. So the users that you will see, you will have my identity, then you will have wow Azure user 1 2 3 4 5. So we'll see that popping up in a couple of minutes. So let's back. Let's see what's the status. Saying configuring. So basically what it's doing is it's enabling or turning on the setting, to turn on the synchronization. Earlier we saw that synchronization was disabled. So so Mac, if you look at overview over here, sync is not enabled, it shows, right? So that's what it's trying to do now, is it's going to, once it is enabled, it will say sync is enabled. Let's see where the progress is. Configuring wow Azure.local. Hopefully this could have enabled the synchronization. So now it's configuring the synchronization rule. Okay, so it's updating the partition information. And password synchronization is getting disabled. And this is installing the Azure AD Connect Health Agent. So basically that monitors the health of the Azure AD Connect synchronization tool. And let's see, let's come back to the portal. It should show me that its sync is enabled. In fact, I should start seeing the users coming from on-prem. Not yet. Still saying sync is not enabled, so we'll wait to complete. And then it will get enabled. Okay, so it says the configuration is complete. You can log into Azure Office 365. It's fine. The activity recycle bin is not enabled, so that's a feature in on-prem Active Directory, which saying should enable it. And this is the source anchor. Since I left Azure AD to decide what source anchor should it use, so it has decided MSDS consistency quite. And what else? Yeah, so one more thing, you can join your Windows 10 machine to Azure AD. And that's probably we'll also cover in next sessions. So, but this is what they're giving information. So let's see here, and we will say refresh. And we should see that the sync is enabled, hopefully. And we will also see that users started popping up. Maybe I can check in my Azure AD Connect over here, which is this is a new portal which Microsoft has released. It is still saying sync status not enabled, so we'll give some time so that it enables it. It takes a couple of minutes before it gets enabled. So while it's getting done, I think we are at the end of our demo, and then we'll see all the users coming, popping in. Uh, Anybody has any question? Probably, we can take advantage of this lull this time. Not yet. We haven't received any user objects. Oh, hopefully, once the synchronization runs, we'll get to see it. Okay, so you can see that Azure AD Connect is now is sync is enabled. So earlier it was saying it was not enabled. It says last sync more than 1 day ago, which is fine. We'll wait for. We'll give it some time, and it can specify. It can allow us for the user. So let's come back here, and if we refresh my Azure AD Connect, so it should show now my the sync is enabled. It is still saying not enabled. Okay. Maybe now I'll come back to this portal, my Azure portal.
Hey Neeraj,
Yeah,
it's me, Ranjit.
here it is.
Hey buddy, thanks for sharing this information. I have a question. So now you are giving a demo of a on-prem Active Directory is getting extended to Azure, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So in that case, like in an enterprise world,
Hmm.
how it is gonna like what are the ports which we need to open? So do we need to have any kind of proxy configuration in the DMC? So how is the background infrastructure in a real time?
So I mean, there is a guide. Maybe I can bring that back. So the port, basically, what you need is 80 and 443 port. That's outbound internet connectivity from Azure AD Connect server, the server which syncs your identities. And there are URLs, specific URLs, which you can lock down your users or your connectivity from that Azure AD Connect to those specific ports.
So
And
basically, you are saying like even though that this particular Azure AD Connect won't be installed on a domain controller, it would be installed on a member
MEMS,
server of our domain, right? Which is on-prem domain, right?
yes, yes.
Okay, so is there any kind of any other relay agent or something is required in the DMC for this process to get complete, or just a member server install the Azure AD Connect, then open up the ports for towards a tenant with the links and all those stuff. Is that is good enough, or is there anything else which we are required to do?
No, so there are two things. I think in last session we discussed about Azure AD Connect, different configurations. So today we are talking about Azure AD Connect along with pass-through. So pass-through is a connector which gets bundled with Azure AD Connect, and Azure AD Connect on its own, it synchronizes the user. So you have two specific port requirements, one for Azure AD Connect server and one for your pass-through. So maybe I can pull those port requirements for you quickly if I may find it. So you will, for your Azure AD Connect anyway, you will require those port to be opened. But for pass-through, additionally, if your pass-through agent is also installed on your Azure AD Connect server, in that case, you, in addition to the ports required for Azure AD Connect, you will also open these ports, which is basically restricted to 80 and 443. So these are the ports that, if you look at it, you will have to open the port outbound connection to MS Proxy uh, .NET and Service Bus. This is basically, Azure AD Connect, or the proxy, uh, the pass-through connector makes use of Service Bus, which is a PaaS offering from Microsoft. So you'll have to open your port to these two. Apart from that, I will also have to open the your port to Azure AD Data Center, IP. So Microsoft publishes on weekly basis the data center IP ranges, and the port that you're gonna make available as your 80 and 443. You need to only open these two ports to these two URLs and plus to the Azure Data Center IP range. This is for pass-through connector. Similarly, you also have port requirement for your Azure AD Connect, which is again, it's only HTTP and HTTPS. So and all communication is encrypted. It goes HTTP on 443, but HTTP is required for downloading the SSL revocation list, because SSL revocation list has to be opened on it's downloaded uh, uh, on HTTP. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because it checks whether certificate is revoked or not.
Okay,
Next.
so let me add one more complexity here.
Hmm.
In that case, if we are using the MS-AppProxy.net and servicebus.windows.net, these are the two URLs which we are giving.
Hmm.
And when we so towards, like, if it is a on-prem Active Directory, when we are extending towards the Azure,
Hmm.
how the connectivity is going to happen, because it is just not getting connected over there, right? Do we need to extend our LAN as well in the networking side? And on top of that, if you consider more secure, okay, if the network admins are asking, hey, can you please tell me what is the endpoint in the Azure AD for me to give a specific server IP address with a port number with an inbound connection enablement, if the network
So
team
you
has.
don't need any inbound connectivity. If you look at this diagram, you don't need any inbound connectivity. It's always an outbound. Your server is making an outbound call. Nothing is reaching out back from internet to your on-prem server. So you will have to open your source will be your IP address of your Azure AD Connect pass-through server, and your destination would be the MS proxy and the Azure Service Bus and the data center, Azure data center IP addresses that I just referred you in this article. This one.
So
It's
this
only
would be a
outbound.
static IP, right?
Uh, See, some of the firewalls have capability to filter based on URL filtering. So if that is enabled, you can specify this, and this IP. Yeah, it's kind of, Microsoft publishes it. It keeps changing on a weekly basis. Sometimes it changes, sometimes it doesn't. But moreover, it remains constant. They update it on weekly, and these are the public IP ranges of Azure IP. So maybe I can just pull that. It's an XML file which you can download on weekly basis. So your port requirement is from Azure AD Connect, or the connector, the pass-through connector, to Service Bus, to MS App Proxy, 80, port number 80, port number 443. It's outbound, not incoming, and plus the IP over here, which is Microsoft Azure Data Center IP range. I don't know if I could answer your question.
Because I get into a situation where it has been asked to give a specific IP address,
Hmm.
because the firewall which they will configure, if it is only given by a given IP. Like, I want to know, in the sense, the question which came in is from where to where the communication happens. And pretty much on prem, we know that we can we can have the
So I
uh,
for your firewall rule will be source will be your IP address of your Azure AD Connect server. Destination,
absolutely.
yeah, destination will be this msproxy.net and the servicebus.net along with the IP range which you get from Azure Data Center IP ranges, and it
Yeah,
one
so
way
that
from your
yeah,
Azure
so
AD Connect server to internet. That's what your rule is
yes,
going to be.
yeah, so that they were not ready to do that. They said that no, we have to give a like IP address.
So
We
currently it
can't.
is, yeah, currently it is like the IP if you need there are some thousands IP which you get over here, or you can specify a range.
Yeah, that was a challenge which I have seen.
Yeah. So that, I mean, typically what I have seen is you can restrict based on the URL filtering. If your firewall, a lot of firewall team, they don't enable it because it put a lot of strain on the firewall per se. So that capability is there, but they don't enable it. So in that case, you don't have any choice but to specify these IP ranges. Okay, so let's get back to the portal. Where I was.
So if you are using direct connect or express route or something, will that be a helpful situation in that case?
So Direct Connect is AWS technology. Probably we'll skip it for this one. But Express Route, it will not help you. The reason is Azure AD Connect traffic is going over. It will help you if you have enabled public peering. So in Express Route, you have private peering, public peering, Microsoft peering. So private peering lets your server traffic from server to server, IS infrastructure as a service component, talk on Express Route. The public peering will let you route your traffic to public endpoint of Microsoft, the PaaS endpoint over Express Route. But that's only when you enable public peering. A lot of companies, they for sake of routing table complexity, if you enable public peering, sometime if your router is not capable enough to handle more than 5,000 routes, it will fail. So people just enable private peering. They don't enable public peering. So if you don't have public peering enabled on Express Route, it's not uh, uh, no, it's not going to help you.
So what you're saying is in the private, we have to use the express route with a private peering,
Public peering turned on.
public peering turned on.
Yep. So then your traffic, which is meant for PaaS endpoint, will get go through the express route. So let's come back to the demo. So now you can see that I have these users which were in on-prem, wow, Azure user 1, user 2, and user 3. You can see all these users got synced. Now, if I try to log in with any of these users, that authentication sequence is going to happen, and it will come back to on-prem for authentication. And the server which is going to, authenticate it for us is our Azure AD Connect server, which also has, the pass-through connector installed on it.
Is there any way where we can see if a user is saying, okay, we haven't got this being synchronized properly? Like you added a user right now, and what is the minimum duration for the user to get synchronized
You
over
can,
to the top?
yeah, you can configure that setting through the synchronization service, and you can control how frequently it will run. So all those custom settings you can do it as a part of that. So if you look at this, you have the synchronization service. If you click on it, you can configure those settings there. So what's your frequency, when was it run, all this troubleshooting will happen from here, and you can
And
control
here,
that.
if even if you look at it, there is uh, export, export, full sync, and full import, right?
Mhm.
What is the difference between all these things? The reason being, once when we enable the sync, will it? will it take the first copy from the local and put it in a place? From there, again, it is exporting to the another place. Then at the end, it is giving to the Azure AD, or why we? What is the significance of this export full sync and full import?
So when you initiate first time, it does the full export. So it will pull the information from Azure from Active Directory into database, and from database it pushes out to Azure AD. So that's your initial sync. That's what happens. And then after that, it's like you have periodic sync that you do it. So essentially, if you have made any changes, anything in that case, that will get pushed out to Azure AD.
Okay, and in that case, if a user is not getting synced, then where do we look at it? Like, hey, what is going on behind the scene? Like, this is pretty much giving you a information saying that it's been exported or sync has been successful. What has been synced, what is not been synced.
So
Do
maybe
we have?
It will show you here. I mean, if there is any synchronization error, at the bottom where you are seeing it on the right hand side, it will show you if there was any failure and the reason of the failure. It will show you here itself. So if anything fails, you'll be able to see it here.
Okay.
So this is your tool, where you will do the troubleshooting. And plus, as I said, I think you did join in the middle. This Azure AD connector is nothing but a mini FIM, for Front Identity Manager, which is now renamed as Microsoft Identity Manager 2016. So it's the same console, same look that you get it. So if you really get into much deeper, you'll have to probably, look into the MIM portion of MIM documentation, and you can get more in depth. But in today's session, I don't intend to cover this detailed synchronization part. It was only meant for, the pass-through authentication and the demo.
Okay. Thanks, buddy.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so I think now you can see that I have these users which was synced from on-prem. If you look at it, one of the users, let's click on the first user, and you will see the source over here, which will show you, which will tell you that it's synced from on-prem. So if I come in profile, so let's come back. Okay, so you can see source, right? So it says Windows Server AD, so which means it has come from on-prem. Now, if I look for any other user, you will see the source as Azure AD, so which was created in Azure AD. So let's come back. Let's say this user, which I created, maybe this one. And if I come to profile, and look at the source. So this has also come from Windows Server AD. So this is also from on-prem. So maybe I'll look at some other. Oh, this is the same one. So let's come back to another user which I had in cloud. Or maybe I'll come over here into old portal, and let's look at the Azure AD. And look at this cloudeasy.com. Look at the users. So you can see over here, source from. You can see local Active Directory. So this Wow Azure 1 has come from local Active Directory. These 5 users are from local Active Directory. This Neeraj Kumar's Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which is this, and these are my Microsoft account, which is created in Microsoft Live Directory. So you can see all the sources over here, these users.